Okay. So. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to be recreating another painting by another one of my very favorite artists of all time. Today we're going to be looking at the art of really one of the most famous artists of all time. This is René Magritte's painting, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, or The Treachery of Images, or the Trahison d'Image, which is arguably one of the most iconic images in the history of art. We'll talk all about the history behind it, and of course about the artist, and we're also going to be painting today's painting as well. So before we get into a bunch of those things, I want to kind of just talk a little bit about how to transfer this image, how to get this image onto a canvas to get started. Of course, you could draw it all out. It's not the most complicated image of all time, but I've done an outline, a tracing of this image that you are free to use. It's free to download. You don't have to do anything except download it. And this image, along with a few other ones, because I'll let you know that there's a few other images. This is a painting we're going to make tomorrow, and this is another painting that we're not going to make, but I do love this painting. It's actually a detail of a larger painting, but there is an outline for that painting, an outline for this one as well. Again, we're going to do this one tomorrow, so tune in tomorrow to see that unfold, or if you're watching this 2 years from now, you could just click on the video to do that. But to get any of these downloads, these templates, you want to click on the video description below, and it's going to take you to a Dropbox folder. And in that Dropbox folder, you're going to see a whole ton of files. And there's lots of files in here. We just keep on scrolling all the way down here, and there's going to be way more of them in the future, but this is where we are at this exact moment in time. If you click down here, René Magritte, you're going to see 6 files in there. There's the 3 original paintings, and then there's 2 versions of each outline. One's a JPEG and one's a PDF. Also, I'll let you know there's a private Facebook group just for people like yourself to join, to share success and struggles. It's a very supportive community of like-minded artists. Some are literally just beginning. There's people who post, "This is the first painting I've ever made," and they post it to the group, which is an honor for me personally. And then there's people who've been painting with me for almost 2 years now. And so you can see people at various different points of their journey. And I just posted this image post here on the Facebook group because I'm about to recreate the first 5 episodes of our Intro to Painting series. And if you have any advice on how to improve that, I would love it if you were to enter that information here on the Facebook group so that I can make it better, including specifically what materials do you recommend other artists, or that I cover to help other artists who are at the beginning of their painting journey. Again, I did this video already, and there's a link to it in the description below, but since I've been doing these live streams for the past 2 years, there's been a lot of things that I've learned and things that maybe are more important than others, and I want to incorporate that in there. So your advice would be very important to me. Again, we're going to talk about the biography of René Magritte here in a moment, but I want to show you how to transfer this image onto a canvas right now. So without further delay, this is what it's going to look like when it's fully transferred. And just while I have all these, actually, no, we'll get to that here in a second. So I'm going to play this video showing how it was done, and then I'm going to walk you through it step by step here. Okay, so you can see that I've got a 9x12 size canvas. Every single painting I've done has been on a 9x12 size canvas. And sometimes I alter the images a little bit just so they fit a little bit better on this format. I've printed out the outline on my inkjet printer here at home. You can use a LaserJet printer. You can use a photocopier if you can hook it up to your computer, or a USB stick. I also just moved this just a tad over, maybe slightly off center, just so that the painting itself actually looks centered. Because sometimes when you print things out, sometimes the printer could be a little bit crooked, or the way it sucks the paper into the printer is a little bit crooked. So you could see the paper itself is not perfectly straight on the page, but the text, I took a little moment just to use a ruler to get it straight. Now I'm using carbon paper here, and you can also see there's some white graphite paper there, because you can buy carbon paper at your art supply store. There's an Amazon link in the description below, and if worse comes to worse, you can always get it from a fabric store, because that's how they transfer patterns onto fabric, or some people do anyway. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but you're going to see, just really quickly, I just traced over all of those lines, zip, 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 zip. And you'll see that there's this little mistake here that I made while I was tracing, and we're going to fix that in a moment. So even if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. We're going to fix it. Any problem in life can be fixed, and maybe those problems aren't even problems to begin with, right? So when you're all done, you've peeled off that paper, you can throw it in the recycling, or you can use it again. Yesterday, for our Robert Indiana Love painting, which turned out awesome, we did 2 versions of it, and I used the template a second time, and I even cut it out to help me get a better image. So these templates can be very helpful. So just as a quick, I'll just let you know, I've already done the outline for tomorrow's episode, and then on December 26th, which in Canada here is called Boxing Day, we're going to do a boxing themed painting. This is one of my favorite paintings of all time, one of my favorite artists, George Bellows. And then let's just take a quick look at just the final few paintings for the month of December. We're going to be doing some Kwanzaa themed paintings. Dr. Cynthia St. James. These are famous paintings which are on US postage stamps. Here's a Jacques-Louis David painting of Napoleon, one of my favorite paintings because it's unfinished, and we'll talk all about that on Thursday of next week. And then to finish out the year, at the end of December, we're going to be doing this Caspar David Friedrich painting, and Friedrich was one of the great Romantic painters. He might have been a romantic guy as well, but he was a Romantic painter, which was an art movement. And I like this image because it's sort of like someone staring off into the distance, and the potential for 2022 that hope treats us much better than 2021 has so far. Okay, so we've got our image transferred onto the canvas. Before I do anything else, I'm just going to get my paints out. And if you make a mistake like this, you can, of course, try to use an eraser to erase that line. Actually, you know what? That turned out pretty good. I was going to just use some white paint to paint it out to get started. Do I still need to use the white paint? I think that's going to disappear. I think that's going to disappear throughout the next few layers of paint. So I'm just going to skip forward. Maybe that's good enough. Okay. So if you do you're drawing on your canvas and you make a few mistakes, it's never the end of the world, right? There's always ways to fix it or incorporate it. As Bob Ross says, it's a happy accident because you never know. Maybe it takes you it opens up a door you didn't think was available to you before. As always, I'm going to begin my paintings with a bit of warm yellow. This is something that probably I'm the only person that does. There's definitely some of you watching who do this. I do this in lieu of putting a warm brown on my canvas, just because it's a little bit faster. I do have brown paint that I can use, but since I use a very limited palette for these classes, which does not include brown, because we can mix brown. I just use this warm yellow, and you know what? 99% of people, by the time the painting is done, would not even be able to tell the difference. And probably 99% of other artists would not be able to tell the difference either. So this is just a real quick time saver, so we're not having to mix paint right at the beginning of the painting. And it also gives every painting that we use this warm yellow a little bit of, surprise, surprise, a warm glow, kind of like that Kodachrome kind of quality. And who doesn't like a warm glow, especially during the cold winter months? Something that has just a little, even if it's imperceptible, that little bit of extra warmth is something that I like. I've always, throughout my career, always prepped a canvas, not necessarily with a color like this, but I've always been really interested in the edges of paintings. I always think a lot of artists, a lot of contemporary artists, don't really pay much attention to the sides of the canvas, and they just think of paintings as images. René Magritte is an artist who thought a lot about paintings and what paintings are and what images are, and that images can deceive us and can lie to us. And this image, we'll talk all about the history of this image. You know, it's a very funny, playful image. You know, this is not a pipe, and it's a picture of a pipe. And it's like, ha ha ha, well, of course it's not an actual pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. And that sounds, you know, like something that we teach kindergarten kids. You know, like, obviously you can't reach into the television and grab a hamburger that's in an advertisement and eat it. You can't even touch the hamburger, let alone eat it, right? So that seems quite obvious to us, but many people are fooled by what they see on television and the internet and film, movies, advertisements. We're all susceptible to that. And I would argue this image and the message behind it is more important today than it was at any other time, particularly, you know, back when René Magritte painted it. You know, we hear all this talk about what is truth, and truth being sort of a flexible, subjective thing, and this idea that there can be a truth that we can all agree on seems sort of like a an endearing thought from the past, unfortunately. So anyway, we're going to make this painting. We'll talk all about some of those, I think, super interesting philosophical issues while we paint it here, and we'll try to keep it light. It is today is Christmas Eve, so welcome to those of you who are celebrating Christmas. And I know Christmas can be a little bit of a, for some people, the happiest time of the year, and for some people, it's the saddest time of the year. So that's why I'm here on my day off, here painting with you guys to give everyone a little bit of an extra place to gather on the holidays. So let's take a look at René Magritte and his biography while our initial layer here dries for just a few moments. Maybe, actually, before I do that, I'm going to blow dry this, and I'm going to put on, I will mix another color. So hold on, René, we're going to get to your biography in a moment here. Okay, I see some really touching comments in the chat here. Let me get this started, and then we'll address all of your lovely holiday wishes here, which I'm so honored to have. My wife and I talk about this literally every night, how just blown away we are by the support we've received from people all over the world throughout, you know, this past year and a half while we've been doing the painting episodes. And then before that I did an intro to drawing course, and that link is in the description below. If I wasn't on medication, I'd probably be sobbing in tears all the time, thinking about how special you guys have made our lives over the past while. So thank you. Okay. So you might say, like, there's all these colors. Are we going to use all these colors? I'm not sure. We'll see. I haven't thought too much about it. I just want to put them all on there. That way I'm not fumbling back and forth. It makes it so much easier. So the reason why I'm just taking a moment to step back here is I want to put this color on the canvas to start, and we'll let that dry, and while it's drying we'll talk about the biography here. So how do we mix that color? Well, actually I see two slightly different shades on the two different monitors. I think basically this is a warm brown with white in it, essentially. You know, depending, one looks a little bit more yellow than the other, but I wonder, we could probably use a little bit of the warm yellow that we have here on the palette. So let's just sort of mix some of this together. Maybe we'll mix it right here. So I'm going to put a little bit more warm yellow in here. I'm also going to take a little bit of warm red. You see, I even just used the other side of my paintbrush here. And let's take a bit of warm blue. We probably won't need as much of it. And then let's stir it up. Oops, let's see, okay. That, actually, once I blend it in, it's pretty good. So that color, you know, you can see is very similar to the color of the pipe once we eventually get to it. Now, I probably should have mixed this to the side here. So let's just scoop a bunch of this paint off, move it to the side, because we're not going to need much of it at all. I'm just going to wipe this brush off, and yeah, we'll clean the brush, because we're going to mix white into this, and oops, we don't want too much brown surprising us coming out of the paint tube here. So the other thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to wipe all that paint out, and we'll see, maybe we can, yeah, we'll see. Okay, so let's take our white, and let's just take a little bit of that paint. And let's see. Not bad. We need a little bit more. And I think we need even more white. In fact, I think let's just take all of that white. Get a little bit more brown on. Now, of course, you could say, well, why go to all that trouble of putting that warm yellow when you're just going to cover it with paint? You know, you could skip that initial step and just mix this and paint it over top. it's just, for me, it's a bit of again, there might be some white or some of the yellow coming around the edges of the canvas, and I like that. It's just something I like. So I'm going to use some matte medium here just to thin this paint out so that I keep some of the yellow and I also keep the image there. So I'm going to put this matte medium. I'm also going to put a little bit more white in here, because this matte medium is effectively, it's sort of behaving like water in the sense that it's going to thin the paint out, make it less opaque. But it's far superior to using water in your paint. Now, I used water originally, but that's just so I can get that done really quickly, and the paint will dry super fast because of the water. Let's look at this color. It's a little bit more red, or so, yeah, so it's gone a bit peachy, so let's just take a bit more. That's a lot of yellow. We're also going to have a bit of the yellow coming through anyway, so maybe let's just, we never know until you paint, right? That's the excitement, the terror of making a painting, is you never know until the paint's on there. I think that's pretty good. It's going to change color as it dries, so we'll have to see once it's dry how this held up. A lot of the image is sort of disappearing a little bit. I'm not too worried, because when it dries, the paint generally will get more transparent. So, and this time I'm not going to paint the edges. I like having a little bit of the yellow kind of showing through on the edges. It just sort of, it's also like a little bit of a hint to people looking at the painting that hey, there's been a few steps along this journey that that are maybe not as obvious. Maybe it's worth taking a little bit of an extra closer look at this painting. Okay, so just really quickly softening that out. It is a little bit patchy in places. I could wait for this to dry and do another second layer on here, but you know what? I think, well, it's, you know, it's hard to say immediately. How about let's just blow dry this, and then we can make a judgment from there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. As I was blow drying it, I was thinking that it isn't totally perfect, and I was thinking to myself, should I do another coat just to show people how to do a second coat? I mean, maybe I should. It's still a little bit wet in here. So I'm just gonna, let's do another coat, because I usually never do a second coat, because I usually am happy with the result. But there's probably a bunch of you that do this and are not happy with the result. So let's just do, I'm going to add a little bit more white. Not nearly as much, you know, last time I added maybe 4 times as much white into this. So actually, let's mix up this color just a little bit. Because what we're going to do is just sort of fill in a little bit of the gaps here, if it's slightly inconsistent. Now, as I said, pretty happy with the way mine turned out, but I know especially if you're a beginner, it doesn't always work out so well. So let's mix this up. Now, this layer is going to be very transparent. You saw that we have maybe 6:1 matte medium, and matte medium is just acrylic paint without any color in it. And now we just added a little bit of color, a little bit of pigment in. So let's paint this again. It's a slightly different color. So the danger is that you can start to obscure the image a little bit. Should have made a bigger batch. Here's me like going, ugh, what am I doing? Okay. Let's see if I can soak up a little bit more. Now this is probably, I should have just kept my mouth shut. Now again, that image it appears to be completely gone. I can still see it, but when I blow dry it, especially that clear, you know, this originally appears to be white when you first put it onto the palette, and it's going to get more and more transparent. So let's just blow dry this, and then I think you'll see the image reappear. Okay, so that's much better. Again, it's, I don't know if you can see, it's definitely pretty subtle. I think even as we sit here, it's going to get a little bit more transparent. Worst comes to worse, you could always, if it really drove you crazy and the image disappeared completely, you could just use your template again and draw it over, and if it's really that, if the image has totally disappeared, then you would be able to see the image all of a sudden. Again, it might be slightly positioned differently than the original. So again, if that second layer I lost all my detail, I'd probably just add a lot more white and just redo some of those layers. I know it's not ideal, but you know, that sometimes that's life, right? You just got to deal with it. You gotta, you know, you got to deal with the hand you've been dealt and move forward. And you know, I always think painting teaches us so many lessons just about life in general, that it's one of the reasons why I like painting. Is it's like every painting is sort of like a what I just learned there transcends painting entirely. Okay, so let's take a little journey into the mind of René Magritte. So, René Magritte, born 1898, dies in 1967 at the age of 68, which is fairly young for most artists, right? Of course, there's some that died much younger, but considering some artists like Salvador Dali, who is his contemporary, who lived well into the 1980s, So yeah, we'll come back to Dali because they have an interesting relationship as well here. They were both surrealists. So he's born in Belgium in 1898, and his father's a tailor. And I think that's really interesting because René Magritte's sort of trademark personal style is always this man who's well dressed, wearing a tie and a suit, and his famous bowler cap, right? Or bowler hat, kind of like Charlie Chaplin, right? Like every single photograph, you see him wearing this suit, you see him wearing the hat, and he paints lots of images with men in suits and with this hat. Whether they're stand-ins for himself or otherwise is up to you to decide. But I just think it's interesting. His father's a tailor, and he decides as he grows up that you know, presenting himself in this particular way is very important. Now, little is known about his childhood because his childhood was quite traumatic, and primarily because his mother suffered from depression, had attempted suicide several times, and his father locked his mom in one of the rooms of the house for days on end for years. And you could just imagine being a child growing up in a house like that, where, I mean, it's entirely, I was thinking about this, maybe his mother, maybe she wasn't depressed, or she was depressed because of something other going on in the house with the father, and the father, maybe he was abusive and locked her, like, who knows what was going on, but he never talked about his childhood, never answered questions about his childhood, and eventually his mom escaped from the house and drowned herself in the river. And there's all sorts of speculation as to maybe he saw her body floating in the ocean, and that played a role in some of the imagery that he created. That's also highly disputed, particularly by the nanny who was there, who actually discovered the body. But there are some images, I mean, even if he wasn't there, I'm sure he probably heard through the small town they were living in some of the stories, and that filtered into his work later on. So he studies at l'Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, which is really the main art school in Belgium, like the most famous, you know, the royal version. Usually when you hear the Royal College of Art or the Royal Academy, those are ones that have been given the blessing by the royal family, right? Including in the Royal College of Art, where I went to school in London, England, right across the street from Buckingham Palace, right? What do I want to say? He experimented with lots of different styles, and we actually see this in his work later on, and I think maybe let's take a look here. I should have uploaded, let me scroll down here, the way that, so we see here some of his early work. This is stuff he was making shortly after his art school period of time. His art school work, which I don't think we see anything here yet. Maybe it'll be at the very, very end when they have the undated stuff. But most of that is work that is a very impressionist kind of style. And Magritte, you know, as I said, so he's experimenting here. We see Cubism is sort of, you know, in the rage at the moment. So a lot of this early work is Cubist, and Futurism, which is another major artwork that's mostly Italian. You know, so he's just experimenting with lots and lots of different styles here. And while he's experimenting with styles, he takes a job as a commercial illustrator, and we see some of these are paintings he did either for advertisements or just kind of maybe to build his portfolio. And then we see kind of a pretty radical change. This is where we start getting into his more mature work here, his surrealist work. And I just want to take a quick second here to look at this painting here by Giorgio Descherico, who's an artist that I want to make a painting of his, maybe even this painting, because it was a pretty important painting in the history of art. This image, Descherico was a Italian painter who was often seen as the first surrealist painter, or among the first surrealist painters, and he made a lot of these very strange images. Let's just see if we... So there are often these landscapes devoid of people, and there's mannequins and Roman sculptures, colonnaded ruins. These things that look like kind of still lifes, kind of landscapes, you know, picture frames. Often if there are people in them, the streets are empty and one person sort of running down the street. So they evoke this feeling of what is called like the fantastic, right? There's something odd, unusual, kind of, you know, prefigures maybe a lot of like not only surrealism but like horror movies. And maybe it's not quite so clear here, but just that general anxiety that something is slightly off, or we have this deja vu or dreamlike experience, right? And that's why the surrealists really latch on to Descherico because of that. And so it's when Magritte sees that painting that we were just looking at here by Descherico, the love song, or Song of Love painting, he sees like, whoa, there's something about this, that the mystery, the strangeness of that's what I want to capture. So his paintings immediately start adopting similar kinds of qualities, going for strangeness, things that defy physics. And, you know, there's lots of floating objects, floating people without faces, animals that are missing parts of their body or combined with other animals. We often see a lot of these female figures in them. That's his wife, whom he married, I think in 1923, you know, around the same sort of period of time. And she figures in a lot of his artwork for the first 10 years, and then, surprise, he cheated on his wife, and they didn't talk to one another for about 10 years, and then they reconciled. That seems to be kind of a theme we see with a lot of artists, is infidelity. Here's another, I really like this painting here, The False Mirror. So he often does these things where like the clouds and the sky kind of appear inside rooms or inside people's faces or eyes. Here's, you know, there's a lot of speculation that these types of images here with their faces covered in cloths are actually referencing his own mother, who, again, she drowned, and she was found with her clothing had covered her face. And whether that's true or not, or whether he saw that image or it was told to him, is something else entirely. This is another painting I really love, where we see a an easel that's painting outside, it looks seamless to what's actually outside. So he likes playing with that type of imagery here. Let's look at a few more. Actually, I want to continue going down, because one of the interesting things, I love this sculpture as well here. He made a number of these where he had faces with clouds going over top. This is another famous one of a birdcage inside of a man's torso. So he leaves Belgium. I love this here, the train coming out of the fireplace. He leaves Belgium and goes to France in 1927, stays there for about 4 years, and then returns to Belgium. He never was particularly financially successful, even though his work was popular with the public. It never really broke through. The main collectors at the time and critics, particularly in the 30s and 40s, detested his work. So the reason I'm showing this is he goes back to Belgium, and he stays in Belgium during the Nazi occupation, during World War II, when the Nazis occupied Belgium, which was, similar to when Picasso stayed in Paris when the Nazis occupied France, and which was seen as a pretty bold gesture. And Magritte was certainly nowhere near as famous as Picasso, and so there would have been a very real danger of him being sent off to a concentration camp and executed. So that, I think, is pretty spectacular. I'm sure there's. I wonder if there's stories written about all of that, because I'd be interested to hear a little bit more. So anyway, maybe I just skipped over. Let's go back here. He made a bunch of these paintings considered to be his Renoir period, which I love. I'm a big fan of Renoir. You recall we did a painting of a woman reading a book. I don't know, one of our very first episodes we did that, right? And Renoir is famous for these often nude female figures in this very painterly kind of quality. And then as we kind of progress here, and I'm not sure if they'll include it, but one of the funny, strange things that Magritte does, here we see some of his later paintings. He dies again in the 60s, early 60s, but to make money, he starts making forgeries of other people's artwork, including his friends like Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali, which I think is... There's something hilarious about someone making forgeries of their friends' artwork and selling them, which is not unusual. There were a number of surrealists. Salvador Dali famously signed literally warehouses full of blank pieces of paper so that people after he died could continue making prints of his work, and sort of feeding into the forgery market of his own artwork, which I think so the surrealists were obviously a very playful group of people. This is also a very famous painting, again, of floating figures, boats with the water in the sails. I love these, the Empire of Lights, where it's dark, the street lights are on, yet in the sky it's very sunny. I just want to see if they have any of his final work here. I'm kind of... no. Again, you can see this is the other painting, which we're not going to do, but it's in the Dropbox folder. I mean, there's a lot of awesome work here. Anyone interested, we just kind of scrolled through that pretty quickly, but you could see that there's a lot of iconic images that he created over the course of his life that now some people are like, oh, that looks kind of familiar. I've seen that in a movie or a car commercial. This is ground zero. This is where it all comes from this one person's imagination, and I can argue, and I've seen many people argue, that really he's one of the most influential artists in history because he basically broke open the doors to and allowed people to create images of fantastical animals and creatures that talk and behave like people, which was considered blasphemy before the Surrealists, right? So the painting we're about to work on here, and we're going to get started in a second here, is actually in the collection of the LA County Museum of Art in Los Angeles, and probably their most important painting in their collection. I would say, maybe, arguably. There's a few other ones, older artworks, but really this is, I'm sure, probably the most famous. Anyway, let's get to the painting. I've been talking for a long time, so it's time to get to work here. Oops, I want this view. Okay, so now that this is dried, you can see it's gone, well, I guess it looks a little bit more pink on the screen than the original, but when I look at it in person, it looks pretty close to the original. So my camera is, I adjusted the color temperature to make it a little bit more warm because my hands were looking a little bit pale and bluish. So that's probably explained. So it is pretty much the same, but if you're wondering why it's a little bit different, that probably explains it. Okay. So how are we gonna make today's painting? Usually, basically we've got our foundational background color established already. So there's really very little to do there except now to paint the pipe itself and then the writing, of course. And then the writing, you could use a Posca acrylic pen to do that, or paint it with a brush. We'll see when we get there. It might be a Posca pen works really fast, but it might be nice to learn a little bit about brush control to get there. So let's get our palette out. Okay. So I think really firstly what we're going to do is just mix a warm brown, similar to what we did previously, but this is the brown that we're going to apply onto the pipe. And the color that I want to mix is what we call the local color. So the local color is the color that when you think of a pipe, if I was to say, what color is this pipe? People would say it's a brown pipe. And so we want to look for what is the sort of true color of that object. Same sort of thing if we say, what color is an apple? And you say, it's a red apple. Okay, so that's the red that we would paint before we add some highlights and shadows. So we're looking for the neutral, the color in the middle that has not been altered through highlight, shadow, reflections. You can have colored lighting, sunlight, right? We just talked about color temperature here on my canvas from the camera. So it's sort of the color as it is supposed to be, like how a child might color it. And so we're gonna mix this color, and then we're gonna paint it over. We'll just paint it up to here, I guess. Okay, so let's I'm just gonna move that out of the way momentarily. How big of a brush do we? Let's go to. I was gonna use a bigger brush, but I don't think we need such a big brush. Or maybe I'll mix with the big brush, and then we'll go to a smaller brush. So we'll take this warm yellow. There's a little bit of white I see in there, but I think that's going to be absorbed nicely by what we've got. Okay, so let's now take a little bit of warm red. And you can see I always like to put a little bit onto the side, just in case, so that way I'm not putting too much in all at once. Okay, immediately I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to need a lot more of this, or at least I want to have a lot more available to me. Like this painting, there's not a lot of other colors, so, you know, it won't hurt to make a larger batch of this brown. So again, let's take a little bit more red. We'll take all of that blue that I put in here. So basically, to make a brown, all we're doing is mixing an orange and then adding blue into that color. So right now, there's maybe 80% warm yellow, maybe, you know, 5%. I'll get the numbers all wrong. Let's say there's like 90% warm yellow, 8% warm red, and 2% warm blue. So we're going to put some more warm blue in here. And that's going to start darkening this color. Let's put a little bit more. I'm going to put a little bit more warm red in here. And what that's going to do is continually darken this color. So right now, I like what this looks like, but it's not quite. Let's just zoom in just so it occupies. This is what we're going for. Right, so we're still not there yet. Let's just, you could take your time. There's no reason. Some people just start taking gobs of paint and do this, and then the color, you know, is not the one they want, and then you're screwed because you've got a big mixture of it. We can take our time and just get closer and closer to where we want to be. Okay, it's still not quite there. Let's add a little bit more blue. Okay, almost there. Taking a bit more blue. If this color starts to go kind of greenish, what should tell you is you need a little bit more red in there to balance it. And if it goes a little bit reddish, that's probably telling you need a little bit more blue. Okay, let's add more. I'm just going slow because there's no hurry, but you know, we could, you know, might as well try to get it quite close. I think a little bit more red. Okay. I think that's pretty good. I think it could go a little bit darker, but you know, I'm always also thinking to myself, it's much easier to darken this color once it gets on the canvas by adding a second layer than it is to lighten everything back up. Okay. So I'm just going to switch now to a smaller brush, and let's put that in the water. Zoom in a bit here. Might as well zoom in on the pipe. Okay. So I'm going to take my brown. You know, it does look a little bit lighter than maybe I want it to be, but I might end up doing a second coat of it anyway, just to get yeah, actually, you know what, I think this is going to be totally fine. Now it's probably very hard to see the original pencil lines underneath here. focus there. Okay. So right now, you can see it's a little bit kind of spotty, and that doesn't surprise me. I always find browns and reds to be a little bit spotty. Now, obviously, I've lost, you know, where the lines are for the highlights, all of that stuff. That's all right. We'll get it all back. We'll eyeball a little bit of it. You know, you could try to paint it in as like little tiny shapes, but I would suggest that would drive you absolutely bananas. And then right in here, curve that. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes. We'll paint, I think, most of the rest of these shapes on. In fact, let's take this same paint now. I'm going to mix a bunch of white into it. Oops, I'm not on camera there. So... and I think there's a little bit more red, just slightly, well, maybe that's slightly peachier. I'm going to downshift to a smaller brush here. Remember, it's not so important that this is all perfect and precise just yet. All right? We want to just get the basic shapes in place. And we'll fine-tune everything later on. Okay, so if you make a little unexpected happy accident, just take a little bit of water and a little rag and just brush that away. Oh, there's another one down there as I'm stamping my hand on the canvas. So let's take care of that. And then make sure to spill water all over the canvas. So the top of this pipe keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm just trying to round out these edges from being so pointy. I want them to be a little bit rounder. I'm actually just gonna brush that a little bit bigger. Even though it's gonna get smaller, I just want to fill that in. And then we're going to darken it when we mix our darker color here shortly. Okay, let's just... Wow, you guys are busy in the comments here. Sorry, still haven't gotten to all of your beautiful comments. Just want to get this painting off and running as quickly as possible. Especially after I blabbed on and on for a while there at the beginning. So let's mix a dark color now. We'll mix our darkest color, which we'll use for the dark part of the pipe. So let's take our cool blue and warm red. Mix that together. And this will give us our darkest possible color. Well, not quite yet. Right now it's like a very dark, muted purple. So let's now take some cool yellow and mix that into the mixture. And that's going to effectively destroy the purple and turn it into a really dark, basically a gray. Right, and we're going to mix white into this, and you'll see that it is, in fact, gray. And, you know, sometimes this takes a little bit of time. If it looks a little bit too green, that tells you you've got a lot of yellow and blue in it, and you just need to add a little bit more red. You could, of course, just use black, but I'm always trying to encourage people to mix their own colors, if not at least a couple of times, so that you know that worst comes to worst, you can make virtually any color that exists with this very small limited palette. Okay. So now let's take this color. Again, this is my local color for this part of the paint. Ay, 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 Michael, what are you doing? Really, the reason why I'm having a little bit of trouble is just because my outlines for the pencils are very hard to see. I could have made my life a little bit easier by just drawing those lines back onto the surface. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, I just basically ended up in the same place I was. It gets kind of a little bit sketchy to continue to erase paint like that, because I run the risk of then starting to wipe the color off of the background layer. So that just means that this mouthpiece on this pipe is just going to be a little bit bigger than it might otherwise be, but it's not really something that concerns me too much. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed in myself for this particular areas, but hey, at some point, especially when we zoom out, that's going to be totally unnoticeable. So let's go back to the other part here, the inside. You know, this painting's not a giant painting either. It's maybe twice the size of the canvas we're working on here. I'll get the dimensions up in a moment, but gives you an idea of the level of precision and skill of René Magritte. One of the things that was, that happened quite a lot is surrealism, when it was first came out, was ridiculed by the critics. Even the Catholic Church weighed in. That it was not widely embraced. But one of the things that I think is, it's hard to argue that against the actual technical quality of a lot of this art. And we talked about that when we looked at Salvador Dali about a year ago. And people would ridicule Dali as being this sort of showman and a dilettante, but it was hard to say that the guy didn't know how to paint. That maybe you might not like the paintings that he makes, but it's not as if he's a bad painter. He doesn't know how, like, the technical, how to make a technically great painting. It's the same sort of thing. Like, you could go to a great restaurant and maybe it's the best sushi chef in the world, but you don't like sushi. That's a personal decision, but it would be hard to say, well, he's a bad chef. You could say, well, he might be the best chef in the world, I just don't like sushi. I love sushi, but so The same sort of thing with a lot of the surrealists, is that they were painting images that were just incredible, that were powerful, but and I think maybe even that's why I think some people felt really threatened by them. They're like, whoa, what are these people doing? They're painting paintings that are incredibly well painted, but we don't like the content of them. It makes us very anxious. Okay, so it's a little bit uneven. This is still our first pass on all of this part of the painting. So even if you get to this place, this is, some people might switch to oil paint at this particular stage. So now I will take a moment to look at, I don't know, like a whole bunch of comments here. Oh, there's Paula and Lolly here, and Donna in the chat. Paula says Merry Christmas. And Donna's watching on her way back from Calgary. Oh my goodness, yeah, the must be snowing out there. Minus 20 and expecting more snow. Oh, that is brutal. For those people in the United States, minus 20, my goodness, what is minus 20? That's like minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or something? Like, brutal. Or no. The standard system of measurements and numbers and everything, I still don't know why the United States doesn't. I think it's just contrarian Americans, right? I spent a fourth of my life now in the United States. I love it is just being difficult for the sake of being difficult. Don't I miss the weather? Donna says. We did have we had some snow falling this morning for about 5 minutes, and we took some pictures with our daughter, and that was great. I think that's all the snow that we need. Donna says, my dad always smoked a pipe. And Lolly says, so I remember as a kid, older men smoking pipes and that really distinct smell. Paul says, thanks, Michael. The virus is blocking people from gathering with one another these days and having to stay home, so it's our blessing to stay home with your class. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for saying so, Paula. And Donna says, I can't imagine the last 2 months without these classes. So sweet. Lolly says, I definitely appreciate these streams, especially the ones over Christmas. Thank you, Michael, and all the lovely fellow students. Just gonna keep on going here. There's so many comments. People talking about wearing warm gloves and slippers, being super cold. Okay, I'm just gonna continue painting here. Thank you for. Sorry, I got a little burp bubble or something in there. Thank you, everyone, for all those generous comments. I'm so touched. I don't even know what to say. Okay, so I think let's do a second coat on everything. The gold. Actually, let's paint that gold. We haven't done the gold. Basically, the gold is just this brown and a lot more yellow. So, gold, I think when people think of gold, they think of like the brightest possible thing. And it's true, if you have, to make it sparkle, we would add lots of white in it. And, but on its own, gold is actually, is a very warm color. And it's actually a fairly muted color if you're trying to paint it. So let's zoom in here. So again, this is our local color. We're going to modify it. We're going to add some reflections and shadows to it. But just to kind of get it in here. Oh, I'm noticing that this is basically just straight across. Whereas I've kind of put a little bit of a curve on it. We can straighten it or curve it out more or less. This is just the part of me that is always looking to create a little bit of depth and perspective. So this color, basically, it's what we see underneath here. Now, I think he's sort of glazed a little bit over top of it, which we'll probably do a little bit of, maybe, to get some of these reflections. So that will also change when we get some darker glaze and a lighter glaze. But I think it's good for right now. So, and you know, it looks basically just like our warm yellow right out of the tube, but as you saw, we added some brown into it and modified it. So every color is relative, right? So let's go back to the brown that we mixed previously, and now we're going to hopefully get a much more saturated brown. More opaque, I mean. What's interesting is, you know, this second coat, it almost appears like it's a different color, right? Because that first one being slightly transparent, especially on top of the white. So I just had a bit of a ridge that I built up with thick paint, and I wanted to wipe that away so it didn't cause me problems. You know, one of the things with these classes, we are in January, there's going to be basically we're going to sort of split it in half. On Tuesdays, we'll be doing very simple paintings, and then on Thursdays, we're going to be doing more complex paintings. So for people that find some of the paintings we do a little bit too difficult, my goal will be to try to keep Tuesdays simple and Thursdays for a little bit more advanced work. In January, mostly I'm just going to be focused on very simple paintings, and I'm also going to try to edit some videos as well. I'm also a bit behind on my graphic novel, which, if my publisher's watching, I am working on it. I'm working on it. It's just, especially the past few weeks with grading in school, it's just been impossible. So in the new year, I took the semester off from school to focus on my book and the YouTube channel. Okay. I mean, I didn't really have to do this brown. I could have started adding some value on either side, but you know, even here, like, I'm sure there's some people who probably look and go like, you know what? I don't know. I could walk away from the painting right now. Like, do I really need to do more layers, or is this good enough? And honestly, that's just a question that each person can answer individually, right? You might find that you get to a place like this and you're like, yeah, okay, that's good. Walk away. So what I'm doing here is I don't like kind of how it bulges, so I'm just delicately, very so slightly widening that area. you know, if you've seen this painting up close, or really any painting, famous painting up close, you'd probably be surprised that it looks a lot like this. Like, it looks a little bit rough. And that's because we're so used to seeing paintings on computer screens or television screens at low resolution, or they're much smaller than they are in person. So as I always say, you're probably the only person who will ever see your own artwork as closely as you're looking at it right now. And most people will never look at these paintings I'm doing so closely, except the video, which will last forever. So for most people are looking at this and being like, wow, pretty sloppy paintings, Michael. Okay. But you know, I like that. I like the fact that paintings can be a little bit sloppy. You know, always remember that, like, painting, as far as I'm concerned, is the area in life where you're given permission to play, right? And painting, I think, should be fun. Yes, you can take painting very seriously and become a professional and do it for a career, for living, as I do. But it's always important to remember it's still at its root something that should be fun. You know, I think about that with, like, one of the reasons I love sports is I always think of, for me, it's very inspiring thinking of the analogy between sports and even art, and that, like, hockey players, tennis players, yes, they're professional, but they're still playing a game, right? And you want to take that game seriously, but at the end of the day, you're getting paid to play a game, right? I'm getting paid to play, and I take plays very seriously. I enjoy it a tremendous lot. But you know, learning is part of, like, is maybe not always the most exciting, entertaining thing, but it's how you get better at the game. And I see painting as a game, primarily because, like a lot of sports, painting hasn't really changed a lot in thousands of years. Yeah, maybe some of the tools are different. We've got acrylic paint, which has only been around for, you know, depending on, you know, maybe at this point 70 years, but really it hasn't been commercially available to artists for that long. Oil painting has been around for about 500 years. You know, at the end of the day, it's just people pushing around pigment on a canvas or piece of paper and creating images. And the fact that some people get angry because of paintings or spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a painting is the same sort of thing. People spend, you know, pay athletes hundreds of millions of dollars to kick a ball into a net or hit a ball over a fence or throw a ball into a basket. You know, it's like, I think it's super nutty. Which is, you know, kind of maybe a good little transition point to kind of coming back to this painting and surrealism in general. Is that surrealism comes out of a few different movements, probably primarily Dada, Dadaism, which is an art movement that began in a few different places almost simultaneously, but you know, mostly in Switzerland. Zurich, and the whole idea of surrealism, or I guess let's just, even before we get to the idea, is that surrealism is a response to, or let's say Dada is a response really to World War I, right? You have, war is madness, right? That's a quote. I'm not sure who said it, but the idea that people are going, especially World War I, where you have people running towards machine guns, which are cutting thousands of people down by the minute, wave after wave after wave of people coming over the trenches and just immediately getting shot and killed. Some of the brightest, most intelligent young people in European history died in this meat grinder of World War I. And over what? I mean, still to this day, I mean, with the assassination of Ferdinand, and then all of these treaties that forced all these countries to just immediately start attacking one another. Like, it's madness. It's like the fact that tens of millions of people died over that thing. And so the Dadaists were just like the world literally went insane for the past 5-10 years, because there's sort of antecedents and it continued afterwards. And the idea of artists, just, you know, lots of artists fought in World War I, of just leaving the war, packing up and going home and making a painting of a landscape or a bowl of fruit, to them just seemed insanity, like as if nothing happened, as if it was all just a dream. And so they were like, well, if the world is insane and is mad, then we have to make art that reflects the insanity of the times. And so they start making poems that make no sense, that are deliberately nonsensical. They start making songs with lyrics that, you know, in made up languages. None of it makes any sense. And this idea of being of nonsense, and then trying to, and maybe that there's beautiful things that come out of the nonsense, is sort of the art world's way of reacting to the insanity of war and all of the death and the horrible things that people saw. And surrealism is kind of the more fully articulated, a little bit more publicly palatable version of Dada. And, you know, these images that Magritte made are so powerful, one, because they're painted in a way that is very kind of clean and approachable, very accessible. He used a lot of humor in his work, which is always a great way of getting people's attention without offending them. You know, because there are people out there chanting, "War is mad, we've got to kill the kings and queens, we've got to have a revolution." That's what happened in Russia. This is what happens in France and Belgium and Switzerland and Spain, France, etc., where people were like, okay, we could start a revolution and chop people's heads off and have public executions. We could also, like, try to make art that responds to this. And so artists turn to the dream world. And, like, okay, well, if this thing that, if you had asked us 5 years before World War I broke out that millions of people would run into cannon fire and machine guns and die for literally nothing, for no reason whatsoever, then, yeah, let's make talking elephants, and let's make people that fly around in the sky. And so you can see that surrealism begins that way, and then what else starts happening? We start having comic books with superheroes like Superman who fly through the air, right? Who have magical powers. We start seeing films and movies that are about all of this fantastical stuff, right? I just think it's super interesting how artists responded to the times, right? And so how will artists respond to the times we're living in today? Okay. Let's continue here. I'm almost out of this brown, but that's okay. We can always mix more, and really the darker color that we make ultimately is probably gonna, we can do almost all of it with glazes as opposed to, yeah, maybe we'll just do that. So I'm just lightening up for the top of the pipe here. Remember, we added just a little bit of warm blue in there. Might have even been a bit of overkill. Let's just rotate that right around. The good thing with also rotating something like this is it also helps us to see the shape that we might not otherwise be able to see properly. Remember, this is a technique we explored in our intro to drawing course that I taught. You know, when we draw things upside down. Okay, and so that means I'm gonna take my brown turned out okay? Yeah, it turned out pretty good. So that's the lip of it. Now we're going to go in and do the darker part again, and I think I'm going to stay upside down for a little while. Let's take... So we want the thicker part to be closer to us, and then the thinner part to be further away. And maybe let's bring that up here. have to be careful because I'm kind of keep widening this thing over and over and over again. It's not perfect, not as perfect as his. I think that's because this needs to get wider there. Okay, or shit. Sorry, a lot of spinning. Oops. Good enough for government work, as my grandfather always used to say. Whoa. So, I mean, as I said, you could probably walk away from here and feel pretty satisfied. And this, you know, when we look at like so-called outsider art by people who were self-taught, we see a lot of images just like this, which is totally fine. They're, you know, and again, any artist would probably be very happy to produce something like that. Even like this is light years away from even what a lot of like high school kids would be able to do. What we're going to do next is we're going to glaze on here. We're going to give some volume and shape to this pipe, and then it's going to all of a sudden become way more three-dimensional, and I think that's going to be very satisfying for most people. So I'm going to blow dry it because it's kind of wet in places, because when we glaze over top of things, we want it to be nice and dry, because if we want to kind of blend out and soften the edges, then if this here is still wet, then we're going to scrub that paint off. And I've done it many times. You've seen, hey, maybe I'll do it again today, and it drives me absolutely bonkers, right? So let's blow dry this. Just looking at our baby cam there, and our daughter's still just rolling around, doesn't want to take a nap. Meanwhile, every adult is like, I would love to take a nap right now. That sounds great. Okay, so to glaze, what I think what I'm going to do, let's mix, won't need too much, so let's take this brown. Actually, I'm going to probably, let's put the brown over here. Let me keep a little bit here just in case I want to do a touch-up in a few minutes, but I'll have the majority of it ready to go. Now let's take our dark color, mix a bit of brown into it. In fact, actually, let's make that darker, because we'll just... Okay. And then I'm going to take my glazing fluid. I've got a new jar of that somewhere here. I'll take a bit more of this. And mix in the glazing fluid into this paint. So it's getting much darker. Right. Now this isn't, we're probably going to go another level darker than this. So, but I want to kind of build up to that point. I don't want to just go there immediately. We can even see in this original, there's several like almost distinct levels of darkness in here. So the other thing too, I might have a blending brush handy just to soften some edges. So let's go into this painting. Oops, sorry. And I might even just, instead of using that big brush, just a smaller brush. Okay. Also just going to go a little bit up here onto this side. Very subtle. Okay. So that's pretty good as a first little step. It looks a little bit patchy, but that's okay. I didn't expect it to look any different than it does. So I'm going to mute and then blow dry this, and we'll do it again. Okay, let's continue. I'm just going to take the same color because we can build up very small, thin layers, or not small, but thin layers of paint here. This area right in the center, I mean, there's not really a point in doing too much of it because we're just going to go much darker over top of it. And there's some reflected light on this side, so I'm going to try to keep a little bit of an edge, a little bit of a light brown. You can see just this little bit halo of lightness there. And I'm also going to go right over top of the oops. Alright, so do that. And similarly down the bottom, I'm just going to allow for a little bit of reflected light there. Okay, so let's blow dry it again, and then we're going to keep dark. I mean, we can just use the same mixture over and over. It's going to take a while to build it up, but I think next time I'm just going to go much darker just to speed this whole process up, but it's, I think, self-evident as to what we're doing. I'm just going to go with the same glaze just a little bit over top of the band again. I guess this is the same mixture. I haven't darkened it quite yet. Do the bottom here and just give it that same little bit of a halo. And I'm just making sure this is dry and clean. Okay. So let's mute this, and the next layer I'm going to go not much darker, but we'll go like 10% darker. Okay. Oh, Heidi's joined us in the chat. Merry Christmas, Heidi. Heidi also asks, how do we price our paintings? That's a great question. That's a big question. That maybe needs a whole separate video. First of all, so you can see I'm just going right in here with a lot more of my darker color in the glazing fluid. I put a substantial amount of glazing fluid in there, because even though I'm going dark, the glazing fluid just allows me to blend that color, or even wipe it or smudge it away if it's not in the place I want it to be. So now I'm going to go kind of into this center area, which I've thus far been kind of avoiding. Notice how I kind of stick to small areas first, because the glazing fluid, even though it dries slower than just the regular paint, because we're putting fairly thin layers of it, it's going to dry relatively quickly. And if you kind of just let it sit there, it will often become too late to be able to do anything with it later on. So it's just these edges that I keep massaging. Up. I'm going to go over top of the band again. Just get that even a little bit darker. So this is just going to help give it that little bit of a reflective quality, right? Because gold, even mine looks a little bit more golden than his, but I always, as you know, tend to kind of make my colors a little bit more bright anyway. So we're getting there, nice and, nice and slowly, which is good, when we're doing glazing, is to take our time, right? You know, I look at the top of this pipe, and now I see it's maybe a little bit too red. I overdid it. I'll probably... I'll mute that a little bit. Probably with a glaze, in fact, when I do the highlight on here. Should we do... Let's do one more. We'll darken it once more. And then that might be enough. Like, we could keep on going and going and going, but, you know, at some point you gotta live your life, right? And notice we haven't done anything to the mouthpiece of the pipe yet, just because it's black, right? So it's not like we can add darker black. We're going to be just adding highlights onto that area. So, last little bit. So I'm always just blending out those edges. Otherwise, you have some pretty hard edges. Now, he, in his painting, he does pretty... It gets pretty dark, pretty... especially kind of around here, pretty hard edge. Yikes. Ooh, almost dropped a wet paintbrush into the middle of the painting. You got to be careful blending and maybe accidentally smudging paint onto this kind of pristine background there. And you know what? Maybe I'm going to take this and just go over top. Right, this was, remember, it was a little bit kind of reddish. Not sure I like that, so that's okay, because we can always paint over anything. So I think what I'm going to do next is start adding highlights, and I'm going to mix a color that I'll put in here and then I'll glaze down. Okay, so I'm going to take my original brown, a bit of white, don't like the ridge that had formed there. Okay. Yeah. It's I think it's better than it was. Is it perfect? No. But what was I gonna, I wanted to make a bit more brown. Just because I'm running low on it and I'm now scraping the barrel, and that just gets really frustrating. So it's all this paint's probably just gonna go to waste anyway, so might as well, rather than like trying to scrimp and save that last little bit. Here I've got a little bit more mixture. Now we're just gonna turn, well, let's turn this into our highlight. So I made a new brown, same brown. Let's add some white to this brown. This brush I was using previously to blend the darker areas. Now I don't want to use it because it's you can even see it's stained with the darker color. You know, it's first of all, that paint is now kind of dry on there, and I don't want to ruin the brush, so I want to clean it. And then the fear is if you're trying to blend and you've got a lighter color and then you're blending it with a paintbrush that's dirty because it was blending darker color, then you might accidentally get darker color all of a sudden surprising you in areas where you wanted it to be lighter. Okay. It's got my lighter color. Let's get our glazing fluid here. It's like this matte glazing fluid. So here's a big, here's a jar of this. I don't know, is there a price tag on here anywhere? I think this is probably like 45 bucks or something. But I mean, I think I used maybe maybe I think I used 2 of these over the course of the past 170 paintings, right? So, and one of these costs somewhere around $15 to $20 depending on the brand and country and all that kind of stuff you're buying it in. So I've been meaning to do this for a while, and I'm just gonna make sure that painting's out of the way. I'm gonna use that from the lid. Okay. Bad idea to put, my finger could be dirty. Don't want to contaminate the inside. The only thing I might do is probably after today's episode, just soak this lid here in some water, hot water, just to get it a little bit cleaner, so that you know, it comes out maybe a little bit easier. That's great. I've been meaning to do this for a while, so thanks for indulging me. And by the way, things like that, that's where people's donations go. When people donate to the channel, I just buy more supplies so I can do more of these episodes. You can see I'm not flying around sitting on beaches with people's donations. I put them all back into the classes. And quite a lot of glazing fluid came off of that lid, right? That's probably more than I'll need for the rest of today's episode. So, thank you again, everyone, for all of the donations that help keep this show up and running. Okay, so let's take our glazing fluid and this lighter color, which we just mixed, and mix that together. So just like we did previously, we're going to start with a color that's, you know, it's not too different than that brown. But if we just went to like white and glazed white on there, it could work, but it's a little bit, it's harder, especially for a beginner artist, to go to get those hyper contrasts, right? So let's take this, let's zoom in here. Also, that brush needs a little bit of love. So here's another fresh brush that I can use for blending. Maybe I'll just do a little bit more. Now I'm kind of pushing my time here. Right, and that might feel like, at least, you know, for the first layer, that is barely visible. Take your time, right? Let's do the same sort of thing right here. Okay, let's go to the... I'm just going to take the same color. I think we'll see. Maybe we'll just... it's potentially going to be a little bit too brown. I might want to use a gray for this, but... So it's a little bit uneven. That's okay. So we're just gonna blow dry all that. Baby steps, baby steps. keep on going. We'll do, I think, one more little layer of this, and then we'll get a little bit lighter. I think I'm going to mix I'm going to let this sit here. I'm going to mix some white into my dark color and make it gray. Lolly says it's officially Christmas in the UK. Merry Christmas, Lolly. That's exciting. Okay, so here's my white and gray. Take some of our glazing fluid. Now that's a lot of paint on here, so let's just wipe all that off. I'm not going to clean it. Just when you're glazing, you generally want to have fairly thin layers, so so that didn't go on very well. So it's a little bit bright. We can also glaze black back in if it's not kind of coming out the way that you want. Okay, so I'm making a bit of a mess, so let's just pause there. I do want to maybe add, so what the thing is, I think I just needed way more glaze in here. So I'm going to put a bit of I'll darken that subsequently, I think, because I'll also darken this. Okay. So there's that little bit of a goof that I made there, so I'm just gonna let that stand for a bit. Let's get... Gotta let that dry. Let's again do the pipe inside. Okay. So I'm just going to just okay. So, you know, if there's those little patchy areas when you blend and you accidentally smudge or take too much away, you can just fix it by just taking a bit of patience, blow drying a little bit, doing a little bit more, filling in those gaps, blow drying. It's not ideal, you know, but if you make, it's, I guess you could say it's like a mistake, but it's just, I don't know if it's really a mistake. It's just something that needs just a little bit of TLC, and then the problem solves itself and goes away. It's a little bit rough. Okay, I haven't done an extra little bit of a highlight on the pipe here yet. If we look at the... He really went quite bright there with a real intense highlight. I think we'll try one more of them here. And actually, that's a lot of paint, so... Okay. You know, I've definitely made the lip inside there a little bit maybe darker than it needed to be. We'll see. Might work. Okay, so I'm going to take more white. And we're going to get a much more intense highlight here on there. I'm just going to take my brush. I just mixed that color and I dipped into the white. So if I just put that on there, I could be up for a bit of a shock. So we've got this white. I really am pushing it by painting on top of it like that. It's not the smartest. Turned out okay, a little uneven, but that's something I... Basically, once you do that first little bit, just pump the brake. This little area here, this is just a damp cloth. I haven't put more water on it in quite a while, as you know. In fact, I think I will put a bit of it. More damp water on it. It's kind of baked in. So now this highlight is kind of intense here, but not as intense here. So I'm gonna have to, I'll do that again. We're gonna blow dry it again. I know it's a pain, all this blow drying and not, but that's how this process works. I'm sorry I haven't answered your question, Heidi, about pricing artwork. It's such a big topic. This is because I put too much glazing fluid on here. I get kind of impatient towards the end of every one of these paintings, and I start trying to kind of go faster, and that's where I usually run into some issues. Kind of like what I just started to do here. Why didn't I just wait and get a glaze that? Okay. So I'm gonna blow dry that, and then we'll touch it up. I mean, this is kind of like, I'm just thinking to myself, here I've spent all this time just doing one pipe, where, you know, other paintings I've done so much more in such a short amount of time. But, you know, when you just have a tiny little, when you have one object here, the tendency is to want to fixate on it that much more. Just while I'm here, I want to add some of this warm yellow, and I think I'm just going to put it a little bit, maybe it's add a tiny bit of white even. Why I'm not doing this as a glaze is, I wonder to Me as well. Mostly just out of impatience. Just to give a bit of a sparkle. Okay, I'm starting to kind of let's just use a different brush here. This is our darkest color, I think, right? I could just go right into the black, but I just want to... darken that. Do I need to darken any of this? I don't know. I think that might be okay. Okay, so we're now really close to the end. I'm just going to leave the pipe alone. I could keep on obsessing over it endlessly, but let's just take a look at him. Wait for that to reboot here. Oh, looks like the spam bots have found me again. It took a little while. What's going on here? Hopefully I'm still alive here. Okay, there we go. Whew, that was weird. Well, let's try to do this. There we are. I guess I could taper, you know, let's just stop painting the pipe, Michael. And let's do the writing down here. I was going to paint it with a brush, but you know what? We've been on the air for a while, so. I hope you don't mind if I just go right into the Posca pen here. Now, I was about to launch into this because I'm impatient, but the proper thing to do, especially because I can barely see this text, is just to bring it back. Now, maybe I'll just zoom in. The marks I'm making are also barely visible. Because they don't need to be super visible. And if I, let's say, make a bit of a mistake, drawing lightly will make it easier to fix any of those mistakes. Like right there with that P. Okay. It just helps just to write it all out to get a little bit closer. Now I think I'm going to widen everything here, but I want to just get all of this in first. All right, so they're going to be a little bit thin lines for the first little bit here. I just noticed my line's slightly crooked. Okay. So just zoom out and I'll just show you why I just did this kind of thin lines to begin with. Is because then if I'm going to widen things, now I can make a decision as to what side of each of these lines need to be widened, etc. So let's zoom back. Let's zoom back in again. So it's this kind of stuff that if you try painting it and then you watch how sort of effortless it is for me to do this, you're like, yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to go and buy some of these Posca pens. Just makes life so much easier. And I can lengthen a letter. Of course, this is going to take a while for it to dry, so you just want to be pretty careful that you're not going to smudge with your hand all over the place. Like, it could take upwards of a few hours. Even if you try blow drying it, you might notice that it doesn't quite dry completely, especially if you've got some kind of thicker areas. And I see I did a little bit of a different version of the U here than he did. Keep in mind, I'm super zoomed in here, right? This is actually as close as the zoom on this lens can go. So, you know, this is the size of my pinky finger. All right, we are up close. And it looks like this is getting a little bit jammed up. So I just want to wipe the tip clean. Just take a moment, you know, you might think, oh, I'm almost at the end of the word, right? Just never in that much of a hurry. Okay, so now looking at that, I just see a few things, like let's say this N. Like, I often feel like by the time I get to the end of a sentence like that, the lines are getting wider and wider. So that's why I come back to the beginning and make sure it's all being treated the same. And if there's any letter that should be bigger, it'd probably be the first letter of the first word, right? Okay, so now let's go right down there. You don't have to sign the painting, but I'm gonna do this here. It's a little, you know, certainly much bigger than his, but okay. Okay, so I feel pretty good about all of that. Do I have a board handy? I wanted to put something underneath there so you could see the painting kind of clearly. Let me 1 second here. Just get rid of some of the distractions in behind. So obviously the highlights aren't quite as intense, and neither are my shadows. That's just something I could do by going a little bit darker. I also see that his highlight comes down a little bit further, which what that does is it makes his pipe look longer, versus by me shortening this highlight, it makes this look a little bit wider, a little more bulbous of a pipe. Right? And it does look like mine's, even anyway, more rounded, versus his is a little bit straighter. Right? Tiny little details, but you know, again, I probably could have brought that in. In fact, I don't know, this is going to drive me crazy, but I have a feeling I just want to... What are you going to do? I think it's okay. So, happy with that. Now remember, all that is going to take a while to dry. All that Posca marker, Posca pen. You know, it's funny, like, the reason why I chose this painting for today, and Magritte even for tomorrow, because we're going to be painting a Magritte painting tomorrow on Christmas Day, is that first of all, we already did a Christmas themed painting, and I didn't want to spend weeks doing a whole bunch of different Christmas themed painting. Because not everybody celebrates Christmas, and some people who celebrate Christmas sort of sometimes are tuning in because they just want to get away from the whole Christmas thing. I want something a little bit different. But also, I thought of, like, surrealism. Like, there's something very surreal about the whole Christmas time anyway, right? It's this guy flying around in a sleigh with reindeer with a glowing nose that are and he jumps down people's chimneys with a big bag and gives presents to billions of children around the world, all within the span of like 12 hours or so. And there's something absolutely ridiculous and surreal about that image when you really start thinking about it. And all of the Christmas traditions, and yet it's also incredibly meaningful and powerful. And we have a little daughter. We took her to see Santa Claus yesterday, and it was like one of the most awesome experiences. You know, how excited she. I don't think she even really knew. I'm not even sure she was really paying attention to Santa. Just the whole spectacle of seeing Santa was pretty cool. But she was really excited, and so the idea of like this totally absurd thing causing that much excitement is also very touching. Like, so many of our traditions at their roots are kind of strange and weird and bizarre, and surrealism, I think, at its, it's talking about dreams and the absurd, sort of is just explicitly pointing out the absurdity of almost all of life, right? And nothing could be more absurd for Christmas than painting René Magritte painting of a pipe on Christmas Eve. And as Lolly said, it's already Christmas in the UK and in Europe and parts of Asia. My sister lives in Australia, and it's been Christmas Day for like 12 hours or something already. So anyway, my best wishes to everyone, no matter where you are on Earth, no matter if you celebrate Christmas or you don't, or if you celebrate Christmas but you don't have anyone to celebrate Christmas with, we can still be grateful for being alive. As Donna said, she's grateful she can't paint right now, but she's grateful to be alive, to be able to just tune in and watch and have a little bit. Is just that the miracle of life, right? There's, as bad as things are right now for some of us, it can get infinitely worse, so much worse that you're not even around to experience it. So I'm very grateful for lots of other things, to have a wonderful family and our fantastic daughter. But I'm also very, very grateful to be able to spend a little bit of time with all of those of you here. And so I encourage you to just reflect a little bit about what you're grateful for, and we will see you guys tomorrow. We're going to be painting another René Magritte painting, something completely different, but it'll also be just something kind of fun. So if you want to tune in for that, just to watch, or you want to paint along, I'll be here with you all Christmas long. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.